It's like you look at a river, and there are places where the flow, there are vortices, and there are areas where the flow is laminar, right? Sometimes it's turbulent, sometimes it's laminar, but it's the same river flowing.
Francis, you said today in the meditation, when you don't know what you are in meditation.
Yeah.
When you know what you are not in meditation.
Yeah.
This would also apply to a sage, for example. Are you kind of saying that Ramana did not know what he was?
Yeah, we don't know. Only consciousness knows what it is. And this knowledge, the experience of what I said yesterday, the experience of this knowledge, of this knowing, is happiness, peace, plenitude. In other words, it's satisfaction. It's the satisfaction that encompasses all levels. In other words, our intelligence has to be satisfied. Our feelings have to be satisfied. Our senses have to be satisfied. We have to be satisfied by truth, by love, and by beauty simultaneously. In other words, if there is only satisfaction through intelligence, something is missing. You see, something is missing. It's too dry. If there is only satisfaction through feelings, it's too wet. Something is missing. So that which is required is nothing is missing. Nothing is missing. But it is not a knowledge as we picture it for ourselves, you know, in the usual sense of knowledge, like knowing how to recognize this cell from that cell. Not this type of knowledge, not a knowledge we can it's not a phenomenal knowledge. But it is a type of knowledge, when we understand something, we experience a satisfaction. When we experience love, there are moments like that. Nothing, these are perfect moments, you see what I mean? And there are also perfect moments of beauty.
So I would imagine that a sage would have that understanding of exactly what you just said, i.e., really that there is no lack of anything.
There is no lack of anything on the deepest level. Now, if the sage in question has a UTI,
that's painful.
Maybe there might be some discomfort. I say that because I remember we were in a retreat and with my teacher, and he had one of those. I told him, "How are you feeling?" He said, "I'm taking antibiotics." That's what he said.
Yeah, but
next day he was fine.
But that's kind of different. I mean, there's physical discomfort based on an ailment that a sage would have. So I'm actually not referring to...
But a sage can be hungry,
sure,
also, or can be... may be affected in a sense if a loved one is affected. You know, there is this story about Atmananda that when his wife passed away, he was with the disciples, and they were talking about her, you know, and they were remembering her. And he was crying, you know. And then a friend visited him. So he went to his office or private room and had this conversation with a friend. And the disciples heard them laughing. You see, it is this being like the string of a violin, you know, being the ability to be touched.
Yeah.
To be touched, but without being affected at the deepest level.
I have a kind of a corollary question to my first one, which, if I may repeat, when you do not know what you are in meditation. You have also said earlier, sometime, if I recall, that in the moment you are either realized or in the moment you are not realized.
Yeah.
Correct?
Depending on what you believe to be.
Yeah. So, to not know what you are is actually an experience in the moment.
Yes.
Which also means you could fall out of that.
Yes.
Thank you.
And in ignorance, we want insurance.
Yeah.
We want to be certain. I'm never going to fall back.
Yeah.
But at that moment, when we want this insurance, we are precisely in ignorance. Because when we are in wisdom, it doesn't matter. Nothing matters.
Yeah.
You see? There is only one reality at that moment, so nothing matters. So, on the absolute plane, nothing ever matters. It's just that we go back and forth between the absolute plane and the relative plane. Experientially, practically speaking, once we have had this first glimpse that has created this questioning about what we are, it's an irreversible process whereby the moments when we fall back into ignorance becomes less and less frequent, and these relapses last less and less. So the difference between this new condition and the conditions that obtained before the glimpse is striking. And especially as time goes on, we can observe all these changes in the way we relate to events.
So if it becomes less and less, we cannot actually say that it is irreversible, because it did reverse at some point in time.
Well, the glimpse is irreversible. It's, I think the best, I mean, the example I use is this woman, her husband is cheating on her. She's a brunette, and one day on the navy blue jacket of the husband, she found a little blonde hair. Right? That's the first glimpse. You see? And then she starts asking questions. You came late from the office yesterday. He said, yes, we had a special meeting. Oh, who was there? Oh, Frank was there. Okay. And then next moment she calls Frank, right? Frank said, what meeting? You see? And finally she hires a private eye. And the private eye comes back with pictures. And no, videos nowadays, right? So there is a process whereby after the first little blonde hair, the truth becomes more and more blatant.
Yeah. You see, I guess what I'm also trying to ask...
So the question is, after the blonde hair episode, is this process reversible? Yes?
It is not.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And you are not a woman.
Yeah. Not yet, anyways. So, when one reads in the scriptures that this experience is permanent, you know, books talk about it, you know, it's been mentioned. This permanency is in reference to this glimpse which you are saying is irreversible.
The self is permanent, yes.
Yeah.
The real experience is permanent.
Yeah.
It refers to the truth, but we read the scriptures from a biased vantage point. It's like looking at something through tainted glasses. And so, in ignorance, we don't want to see the truth. You see? Because we see the entire thing from the vantage point of a person. We see ourselves as a person trying to reach enlightenment. Whereas enlightenment is the end of the belief to be such a person. Right?
Yes.
So there is an iterative process in which we go back and forth between ignorance and back to the old belief system. The old belief systems, they have been injected with a perhaps slow, but nevertheless lethal chemical, you see? Polonium, you know? So it is true that there is an irreversibility to it. It is true that from the vantage point in which there is an evolution in time, there is an evolution of the symptoms, right? Over time.
Yes. Thank you.
At some point, it doesn't matter. Ignorance or wisdom, no importance. You see what I mean? For instance, if we feel guilty about having relapsed into ignorance. It simply means at that moment that we are into it up to the we are just swimming into it. If we see it as a problem, same thing. We are completely in it, swimming in it. That's why the sage, from the vantage point of wisdom, I prefer that rather than to see the sage. From the vantage point of wisdom, ignorance is not a problem.
Yeah.
It's a way, it's a natural phenomenon in the flow of things. It's like you look at a river, and there are places where the flow, there are vortices, and there are areas where the flow is laminar, right? Sometimes it's turbulent, sometimes it's laminar, but it's the same river flowing. The vortices seems to be separate, right? But that's simply the way the river flows locally. So we have to see the beauty of the river. No, like a child seeing a river for the first time. Not too deep, and putting the hands in the water, the feet in the water. I remember as a child, I was 3 years old, and it was in the south of France, and my parents went on vacation. They took me to by the sea, so they rented a very shabby place, I assume. It was very shabby because outside, I remember that the street was not paved, and there was just a pipe coming out of the ground and the faucet. No? It was really third world type of thing. It was just 2 years after the war, right? And the faucet. And I went to this faucet, and it was an experience, such a delightful experience, that for years I was dreaming of this faucet and the water running from it and the mud it was creating and how I was playing with it. So the beauty, is in the eyes of the beholder.
Yeah, indeed. I was also quite struck of, I think, what you mentioned yesterday. I forget now. I think you said, I know I am, but I don't know what I am.
Yeah.
I found that very, very profound.
If we know what we are cooked,
Yeah.
Even if, let's say you come here and you say, yeah, I know what I am. I'm consciousness. But no, because if you say consciousness, it's just a word. Yeah. You see? you have to go deeper, and the word has a reference. And then if you follow the word consciousness to the reference, yes, it takes you back to the real knowing, which is, you know, something invisible that you are, and that you know through some kind of direct experience, right? But not, you don't know that like you know a glass or a flower. So even that, you have to be careful not to kill the experience of consciousness by making an object out of it, or a word, and especially not by making a theory about it. You see what I mean? For instance, something we have read, you know, and we have studied, and we are proud about it, you know, and you become a pandit, you know, and you have read all the texts, you know all the Upanishad, and you can sing the Mandukya Upanishad, you know, in Sanskrit, you know, and you have debated, and you have read all of Shankara, you know, and you debated all the subtleties of, and you're kind of proud of it, and you wear this yellow robe. Be careful. Because the experience may be elusive, you see, if we... I would say that you cannot put the truth in a bottle, no matter how beautiful, or no matter how big the bottle, or no matter how well engineered the bottle. And even if the bottle has a label that says Advaita, it's like when you go to buy a wine, right?
Yeah.
And if the label says Bordeaux, watch out.
Yeah. It's like what you also said yesterday. We are talking about things which cannot be talked about. And you used a very strong adjective. You said it's preposterous. So
he cannot, but the extraordinary thing is that when two truth lovers speaks about it, you know, it can be talked about when we talk from it to it. Jesus says, when two or more are gathered in my name, I am among them. Gathered in my name means that people gather and speak or remain silent, it doesn't matter. In the name not of Jesus, no, not in the name of Jesus, the man, on the name of truth, right? Of the I am, which is the truth, the path, and the life. You know? The truth is among them. That's a mystery. That's something. When there is authenticity in the love for it, you know, then something happens. That's why we meet here, really. That's not to talk about Advaita, I always say the same thing, right? So everybody knows all of my story, especially the Pope stories.
But you have the ability to slice the carrot in about 6,000 ways.
Yeah, I need to find new Pope stories.
New Pope stories.